Hello, welcome to the old Fliers. Would you like to know who was the first female pilot in America? She gained her licence 7 years after the Wright brothers' first powered flights of 1903. She wasn't the first woman to fly solo. Raymond de la Roche of France in 1909 set that record. The solo flight in 1903 of Ada de Acosta of the United States in a powered dirigible is deemed not to count as flight in a controlled aircraft. To put the achievement of these women into context, this was at a time where women around the world were fighting for the right to vote and to enjoy equal opportunity with men. Hard to believe that in this day and age there are still countries in this world which deny women these basic rights. So who was this woman? She was Blanche Stuart Scott, who was born in April 1884 in Rochester, New York. Her father was a successful businessman. He bought her a car when she was in her teens, and she drove it about the city, although today she would have been considered too young to drive. Her family considered her a tomboy and sent her to a finishing school. In 1910, when 26 years of age, Scott became the second woman, after Alice Hyler Ramsey, to drive an automobile across the United States. The trip was sponsored by the Wiley's Overland Company and the car was named Lady Overland. As she passed through Dayton, Ohio, she watched two Wright aeroplanes flying above a field. I looked at them and thought how perfectly idiotic they were, she later recalled. Anybody who would do that was crazy as a loon. After she reached the West Coast, an Associated Press reporter told her that the pilot of a Farman biplane was waiting to take her aloft. Scott accepted the offer despite being petrified, and much to her relief, the Farman crashed before she could make the flight. The pilot was uninjured, but the reporter had already filed a story saying Scott had flown. Vassar girl motors across continent and then goes up in an aeroplane, blared the New York Times on August the 7th, 1910. To save his job, the reporter and Scott made a pact to keep quiet about the crash and the ride that never happened. So Scott's first flight was a fabrication. Scott's auto trip drew the attention of Jerome Fanciulli of the Curtiss exhibition team, who asked her if she would like to learn to fly. Glenn Curtiss did not share Fanciulli's enthusiasm for the stunt. However, he agreed to give her lessons. She was the first and only woman to receive the instruction from Curtiss. To prevent her aircraft from gaining enough speed to become airborne while taxiing on her own, Curtiss inserted a block of wood behind the throttle pedal. However, something happened, and on September the 2nd, Scott managed to fly to an altitude of 12 metres or 40 feet in the air. Some sources give the date between the 2nd to the 12th of September. Either the block of wood moved or a gust of wind lifted the biplane. Her flight was short and possibly unintentional, but Scott is credited by the early birds of aviation as the first woman to pilot and solo in an aeroplane in the United States. Although Bessica Medler Raich's flight 10 days later was accredited as the first by the Aeronautical Society of America at the time. In those years there were no formal training for aviators and discrimination against women was widespread. She virtually had to teach herself in dangerous and unstable aircraft and had no career path to look forward to in the industry or the military. Yet she launched herself into a career of firsts in fields that were completely male-dominated, new and dangerous. Most of her contemporaries felt that if God had wanted a woman to fly, he would have given her wings. But hang on, isn't that what they said about mankind as well? It's also true to say it was thought that at that time the place for a woman was definitely in the home. 6 weeks later, she made her debut as a member of the Curtiss exhibition team at an air meet in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That means she was still inexperienced, Her exhibition flying earned her the nickname Tomboy of the Air. She became an accomplished stunt pilot known for flying upside down and performing death dives, diving from an altitude of 4,000 feet and suddenly pulling up only 200 feet from the ground. She was earning up to an astonishing $5,000 a week. In 1911, she became the first woman in America to fly long distance when she flew 60 miles non-stop. Think of it. Long distance considered to be 60 miles. These truly were early days. In 1912, Scott contracted to fly for Glenn Martin and became the first female test pilot when she flew Martin prototypes before the final blueprints for the aircraft had been made. In June 1912, she was at the Boston-Harvard meet when Harriet Quimby and passenger William Willard were flying a brand new Blériot when it suddenly pitched forward, sending them to their deaths. Remember, this is at a time when there were no such things as seat belts to secure them to the aircraft. Scott ceased flying for a while. Accidents and fatalities were frequent in aviation's early years, and Scott suffered her own accident in 1913 that caused serious injury. It took her a year to recover. She retired from flying in 1916 because she was bothered by the public's interest in air crashes and an aviation industry which allowed no opportunity for women to become mechanics or engineers. She had been briefly married, once to Harry Tuttle and once to George Hennings, but found married life incompatible with flying. Her first husband, for instance, said, "It's either flying or me." Now, guess what happened there? In the 1930s, Scott worked as a scriptwriter for RKO Universal Studios and Warner Brothers in California. She also wrote, produced and performed on radio shows. On September the 6th, 1948, Scott became the first American woman to fly in a jet when she was the passenger in a TF-80C piloted by Chuck Yeager. Knowing Scott's history as a stunt pilot, Yeager treated her to some snap rolls and a 14,000-foot dive. In 1954, Scott began working for the United States Air Force Museum, helping to acquire early aviation materials. She died in January 1970 in New York, aged 84. The United States Postal Service issued an airmail stamp commemorating Scott's achievements in aviation. In 2005, Scott was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. An interesting woman. I would have loved to have known. She would have had some great stories. Thank you.